Hey everyone, my name is Ben Baby. I cover the Cincinnati Bengals for ESPN's NFL Nation. As you see, we're here at Paycor Stadium, a couple days out from Cincinnati hosting the Baltimore Ravens in the wild card game. Now, this is a game that we've seen a couple times this year. We saw it in prime time, during Week 5 at Baltimore, in which the Bengals won, and then just last week, Week 18, the Bengals beat Baltimore in the regular season finale, albeit against a couple of Baltimore's backups, but nonetheless, still a win. And now is when we're going to see what this game is like when it really matters. And this game is going to be the start of the Bengals' second straight postseason run. The Bengals coming off a Super Bowl appearance last year. And if the Bengals want to get back to that game and potentially hoist the Lombardi Trophy, there are three things that is going to really hinge on. And number one, it always starts with number 9, in Joe Burrow. As we saw over the course of the regular season, as Burrow continued to play well and really came back from that emergency appendectomy, the Bengals offense really went to another level. I think the one knock about the offense, and we asked Burrow and Bengals coach Zach Taylor just here in this room throughout the week about the lack of consistency maybe throughout the last 3 games. And one thing to keep in mind is that the Bengals seem to be in control whenever they flip the switch. From the only time they played from behind during those 3 games was at Tampa Bay when they fell behind 17-0. And then in the second half, they got those turnovers. They were able to take advantage of short fields and really play well against the Buccaneers in a game that ended up being an easy victory by the end of the fourth quarter. Then in the last 2 games, there was the New England game, and then with the Buffalo game canceled because of Damar Hamlin's cardiac arrest, the Bengals had Baltimore to close the season. In that game against New England and against Baltimore, the Bengals built a big lead and were able to nurse it home, kind of like a boxer when they get a big lead in early rounds, and then you kind of take it home to the finish. You win on the scorecards. You get a unanimous decision. That's essentially what the Bengals got in those last 2 games. And throughout all of their success, Joe Burrow is at the center of it. And when you look at his advanced metrics, his total QBR among the best in the league, it's in the top 5 from week 6 on. And then one stat I thought that was really interesting was that his completion percentage over expectation, that was among the top 3 in the NFL. And that number specifically tells you a lot about Burrow, because he's a guy, when he came into the league out of LSU, when the Bengals got him with the first overall pick in 2020, that was something they really prized and they valued in Burrow. And the fact that he was very accurate, he made great decisions, and he was timely in getting the ball out of his hands. And the accuracy, that completion percentage over expectation number that's generated by NFL Next Gen Stats, that shows you that even on the throws that the models projects him to make, Burrow's even more accurate than that. And for him to be on the plus side like he is, and in the top echelon of NFL quarterbacks, tells you just how well he's playing. And for the Bengals, they were able to play well during this 8-game win streak that they closed the regular season on. Despite losing a couple of receivers at times, we saw Jamar Chase out for 4 games with that hip injury. T. Higgins was dealing with a hamstring issue. And the run game also struggled throughout the course of the end of the regular season. And despite all of that, Joe Burrow was still able to get things done. He was able to manage injuries on the offensive line. And if Burrow continues to play well and plays at that level, the Bengals have to feel good about their chances in getting back to at least the AFC Championship game, if not the Super Bowl. And another thing that we want to touch on, and maybe one of the biggest things, and we'll combine these two, is that the run game and the pass protection. So things that primarily do with the offensive line, those are going to be key to watch as we go into this postseason stretch. Last year, we all know the narrative. We all know the numbers. Joe Burrow sacked 70 times in the postseason and regular season combined. The Bengals go out and they get 4 new offensive linemen. And for the most part, the offensive line looked good throughout the year. However, the Bengals will be going into the postseason without at least 2 offensive linemen for at least 1 game. Lyle Collins, their starting right tackle, out for the season with an ACL injury. And then Alex Kappa, their starting right guard, he's out with an ankle injury for at least this week. And I asked Zach Taylor if he expects Alex back at any point during the course of the postseason. And Zach didn't give me a really good answer. So as of now, we just know he's going to miss this week's game against Baltimore. And I think you have to give Joe Burrow a lot of credit going back to, the timeliness of him getting the ball out and the checkdowns he's taken this year. I think when you ask Burrow, when you ask anybody associated with this offense, those two things are big reasons why the Bengals have been so much more effective offensively than they were a year ago. You go look at their touchdowns per drive, their points per drive. All of those are near the top of the NFL. And that's without having an explosive offense that they had and when they led the league in yards per attempt in 2021. And so that shows you they're able to move the ball consistently. And with how much they've been dropping back, I think the pass protection has been good enough for Burrow to feel comfortable and to operate well. Will that continue in the postseason? I think is a big question mark because last year at the end of the regular season, the offensive line looked like they were getting the job done. And then once the postseason hit, it looked to be a completely different story. And like last year, they were down a right tackle. Riley Reif was their starter last year. This year, with it being Lyle Collins, Hakeem Adeniji, a guy who was their sixth offensive lineman throughout the year. He's someone who will play right tackle they feel really good about, who won the starting job in, I believe, week 17, going into that Buffalo game. And the fact that he was able to win that spot, play well in week 18, should give the Bengals a lot of confidence. Max Sharping is a guy who will play at right guard, someone who they got right at the end of cutdowns at training camp, who has experience as a starter in Houston. They will be tasked with protecting Burrow and making sure that they're able to handle some of these really good defensive fronts that they're going to see from now really until, however long the postseason goes. And then with that is also the run game. And I think this is a big concern because, throughout the course of the year, you had the beginning where the run game struggled. The middle of the year when they went into more of a gap scheme and went away from a lot of wide zone runs. And you saw Samaje Perine and Joe Mixon working really well, going downhill in a scheme the offensive line really enjoyed, to where the last couple of weeks, that run efficiency just hasn't been there. And the Bengals have been open and honest about the fact that they would like the run game to be a little bit better. Are they maybe trusting Joe Burrow to drop back as much and they feel like they want him to have the ball in his hands? Or do they feel like he has to throw the ball because they're not running as effectively? I think that's a very interesting dynamic, and we'll see that play out, especially with how these postseason games might go. And we talked about the fact that the last couple of games that they've gotten out to big leads and nursed them. I think one of the reasons the Bengals haven't been able to maybe put those teams away or drain the clock in the second half after getting to big leads is the fact that they just haven't been able to run the ball all that well. And in the postseason, you've got to have a balanced attack. You can't let defensive linemen tee off on those offensive linemen and really create more pressures for Joe Burrow and create a higher risk of injury and contacts, which is ultimately what you desperately want to avoid, whether it be the postseason, regular season, or whenever it is. And so I think those two things will be key. And last, but definitely not least, the turnover margin. If you go back and you look at the video we made all the way at the beginning of the year, and hopefully if you've liked and subscribed, you've watched a lot of these videos and a lot of our content here on this channel, we talked a lot about that turnover margin. And you go back and look at the 2021 postseason, one of the main reasons why the Bengals were almost able to win the Super Bowl, in fact, I'd say a drive away from winning the Super Bowl, is because they were able to get key turnovers and key times. And in games throughout the year, you've seen that. We saw against Kansas City earlier, Jermaine Pratt had a big turnover against New England when it looked like the Patriots might pull off that big comeback that we talked about earlier. The Bengals got a turnover. And, last week you saw that as well. The Bengals were able to turn over Anthony Brown, the Ravens' third-string quarterback, and a big reason why they were successful. We talked to Bengals coaches, Bengals defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo and offensive coordinator Brian Callahan, and that turnover margin is something that they stress. It's something that is a big point of emphasis throughout the building. In fact, I asked Zach Taylor about it, and he said that running backs coach Justin Hill, he gives a presentation every week about the turnovers and that margin and why it's so critical, especially in the postseason when possessions are going to be so precious and so limited. And so if the Bengals if all three of those things go in their favor, if Joe Burrow was able to play like the MVP candidate he has looked like for most of this season, if the offensive line can protect him, if the run game can find that efficiency, and oh, by the way, if they can get those turnovers, that all three of those things, those are going to be critical, and those may be the key for the Bengals potentially winning the first Super Bowl in franchise history.
Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.